Well,
Nolan, you're all the way across the stage. I can barely see.
We made it.
it's a good thing. Steve and I, just to let you all know, Steve and I just finished our second civility session of the conference, and quite frankly, we're a little tired of all the harmony. So, so if you all would get in a big racket, we'd appreciate it and make good theater, right? So, Steve, kick it off.
All right, so I think we have to start with the big news last week and this week. The first significant auto insurance reform legislation in this state in my lifetime. In fact, since 1973, everyone said we couldn't do this. Everyone said that the disagreements across the aisle were too significant. I'd love for each of you to talk about how we got to the deal that we saw the governor sign on the porch today. Speaker, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, this is certainly a big win for the state of Michigan. And who would think that in an era of divided government, when you have a first-time governor, a first-time majority leader, a first-time speaker, and really newly formed relationships in the House and Senate, that this would be the time that we tackle it. And I think it truly was an understanding at the very beginning of this term. The very first conversation I had with the governor ultimately centered around this. You and I can either share in the blame for nothing getting done, or we can share in the credit for things getting done. And this was an excellent example of what happens when you truly can put politics aside. We're going to have our differences, we know that, and just focus on the policy. And I think it's a great testament of what can happen in divided government when you truly have an attempt to find consensus. And I think it was a great way to start the term off. We have many other important issues we have to tackle. And in an era of divided government, you need to negotiate. But all negotiations require a relationship, and you don't have that without trust. That's what was built during this process. So it was a big win for 7 million drivers in our state, but it was also a big win for everyone up here. And I think we now have more faith from our caucuses and the people of our state. And there's a lot of optimism up here on the island right now, and as there should be. And so it was very excited about it, happy to partner with the governor to get that done.
Yeah, I mean, I think during the negotiations, too, what was really important is that we kept going back to that very first day of the 100th legislature when we said we would work together. And it did take all of us at the table. And to all credit to the governor, too, with all her legislative experience coming into this position, that was a really critical role as well to bring everyone together and really work through some of the details.
Stephen, were you born in 1973?
just barely. I would have been 2.
All right. I believe the difference this time was that in every previous attempt to reform auto insurance in Michigan, it was done through a filter heavily weighted toward one of the 4 special interests, and it allowed the other interests to pick away at it. And when we started this one, we said we were going to do this one way and one way only, right down the middle, and we're going to be representing drivers in Michigan, not special interests. At the end, if we got equal amount of complaints from all the special interests, we did a pretty good job, and I think we succeeded in that. There were 4 goals in my mind that we were trying to achieve. I think we hit the home run on 3 of the 4, and the 4th one, we got a little more work to do.
Jim, lots of people, I think, reflexively believe that Detroit and Detroiters pay the highest insurance rates in the state and some of the highest in the nation. In fact, there was a study that came out last month that showed it's drivers in Flint who actually are paying the highest rate. So talk about how important this compromise was to your vote.
Can't catch a break on anything. So.
Yeah, right.
No, it was extremely important, not just for the residents of Flint and the drivers of Flint, but everywhere. But I think we were seeing a de facto, we were criminalizing poor people because so many people in my community and across the state, particularly in urban communities, just made the choice not to buy insurance and hoped they didn't get caught. And when they did, obviously we've seen, people, they get something on their record, they end up being penalized for that. And I think we came up with a pretty good compromise here that should encourage people to follow the law and get insurance. It should be significantly lower for them. And we kept in place the coverage model to make sure that people still, if something terrible happens, they still are covered. And I think, you know, as Mike said, we're going to have to go back and look at this. This is any good piece of legislation is changed over and over and over again. That's okay, but it was a really important first step and a start.
How big a factor was Dan Gilbert's threat to start a petition drive, or his actual beginning of that citizens initiative drive? What role did that play in pushing this thing forward? Jump in, anybody.
I think when you tackle something that's eluded the state for 30 years, victory has 1,000 fathers. And there's multiple dynamics you can point to of why we were able to accomplish this reform. I think a real political dynamic was there were stakeholders and special interests that have built their entire business model around the current system of auto no-fault. And, you know, for the past 20 years, their only goal was to truly block the legislature from reforming it in a way that would cause them to have to adjust their business model. And with Dan Gilbert's threat out there of potentially putting it on the ballot and it being more aggressive than ours, it did make the special interests realize, hey, you know what, maybe we have to negotiate on this. Maybe the legislature's on it.
But didn't it also take away some of the governor's leverage in these negotiations? She had wanted to tie this to a budget deal and to a fuel tax hike. Did that take those things off the table?
I think you're underestimating my governor. And Dan had been sending the signal that he was willing to do that for many, many months. The fact that he chose to do it in that particular week, I can tell you that we were already engaged in very fruitful negotiations with my governor at that time. And so you can read into that any way you want to. It was, the timing was interesting, but I don't think it moved the needle.
So you got that done. Everybody's happy. Now,
Wait, is that all the time we're going to spend on celebrating this, and we're going to go into something else?
yeah, we got hard questions.
Yeah, well, before we go to the next question,
What have you done for me lately?
You twice have referred to the governor as my governor, Senator. That might shock some people, given that you come from the opposite party.
Well, it wouldn't shock anybody that's been listening to me since January, because that's how I've been referring to her since
Has
then.
it?
You know, this is a representative democracy, and I believe at my core that voters are always right. Doesn't mean I always agree with voters, but they're always right. And so what I think we have an obligation to do is when voters speak, we sit back and try to learn what they're telling us, not complain about what they did. And Governor Whitmer is my governor, and she's going to be my governor until she's not elected. And I'm committed to supporting her in every way I can, you know, given the differences that we have. But there's two circles of overlap here, and I still say there's 75% of overlap that we're common on, and the other pieces, you know, maybe not. Yeah.
So, Mike, you're all that stands between us and some really good bourbon down at the tent tonight. So we are going to move this along and go to road funding.
I'm all for that.
You all came together on this. Can we expect a similar coming together on funding for roads?
Well, we certainly need to. That infrastructure and education are such top critical issues. And again, the voters told us over and over again, they want those two areas tackled too. So, you know, we listened on the insurance and we came together for that, and we absolutely have to do it again when it comes to the roads and education.
But Representative Greig, if you posted a bill, if there was a bill posted for a 45-cent tax hike, fuel tax hike, would your caucus support it?
You know what? If they want to put up half the votes, I'll put up half the votes. We'll get it done. You know, we've got to work together and get it done.
Jim?
I can put up half. I mean, or obviously we'll wait to see what our colleagues put out as a plan, and we'll find some sort of compromise. But I think we have a serious responsibility to make sure that we address this infrastructure, roads and bridges and things of that nature, and also make sure that we continue to get our budgets done in a way that we have predictability.
Any Republican votes for a fuel tax hike of that size?
Nope.
Yeah, there unfortunately will not be half the caucus supporting a 45-cent gas tax.
So where does the money come from?
Yeah.
So I'm a little frustrated that the only focus is on money. You know, money is a key part of it, but I believe we need to change our culture in Michigan and make sure that transportation, infrastructure, and all things associated with that are part of our long-term structure and culture. And so I'm committed to doing exactly what we did with regards to insurance reform, and that is a very deliberate, focused process. And in the Senate, we're going to do it in two pieces. On one piece is going to be finance and funding related, and the other piece is going to be related to operations, quality, and value. And my goal, and I hope I can convince my colleagues to be our goal, is to leave a legacy in Michigan so that future legislatures, all they have to do is essentially continue to incorporate what we set the standard for. The best gift we can give to this state on this topic is the ability to see forward 5 to even 10 years, make it a stretch, so that those associated with making sure we have good roads have a long-term planning horizon that they can count on and not have to worry about the next budget cycle.
Lee, you're not even on board with the $2 billion, $2.5 billion figure for roads.
So first, let me answer. You asked a question first. Are we going to see the same, collaboration on roads as we saw as no fault? I mean, we ended in a good spot on car insurance. Mm-hmm. We ended today on the porch, but it was a rocky road to get there, right? We all know that, and we acknowledge that, and that's okay. Government isn't always intended to be pretty, but the outcome, hopefully, is that you want to see good policy. And, the pathway to seeing our roads fixed might not be completely without bumps either. But at the same time, we have to assess the situation. That's what we did on No Fault. We assessed there was a problem. We realized it was holding our state back, and then we came together with a solution. I would say on roads, we're still assessing the problem. There's differences, Nolan, since the day I took office. In 2014, every single specialist out there said our roads need about $1.2 billion of additional funding. By 2015, it was $2 billion. Well, we got to 1.2. Now we're being told it's 2.5. It's difficult to hit a target that's always changing, but I've said from day one, I don't want to have a conversation about new revenue until every penny that's paid at the pump is going towards roads. That is the heart of the problem in our state. We're an outlier because of it. We pay in the top 5 in taxes at the pump in the country, but our roads are garbage. Why? Because not all of it's going to roads. It's a no-brainer. That needs to be addressed first.
So you say that the number keeps going up, but it's kind of like your house, right? If you need a new roof today and the estimate is $5,000 and you put $1,000 into it, how much more do you need in a year or two? It might be $6,000 or $7,000 or $8,000. And so I guess I would love for you to talk about why you think. And Senator Shirkey, you said the same kind of thing. Money's not the only issue. How can we get to an agreement that we've got to finally take care of this from a money perspective in a comprehensive way? Do you not believe that that kind of solution is achievable?
Oh, I absolutely believe it's achievable. I think if there's anyone up here who didn't believe it's achievable to come to a compromise, they should probably step down in their leadership position. All of us need to be committed to coming up with a solution. But there's going to be differences of opinion in how we get there. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder as far as what a good plan is. But I will tell you this, as long as there's a pothole in the road, people are still going to say there's not enough funding for roads. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that. What is incumbent on us as leaders is to ensure that we're working collaboratively with each other and saying, let's fund our roads through a responsible budget that's not breaking the budgets of our Michigan families. Because I will tell you this, on the 45-cent gas tax increase, I applaud the governor for putting out a plan. But the people of our state cannot afford a 45-cent gas tax increase. Because of that, they don't support it. And that will not be adopted. So we're starting from scratch, but with a renewed sense of we're going to find a solution. It's going to take time.
Well, and I think something that's so important to get started in the conversation is having agreed upon set of facts, right? One of the first questions I ask is, how much does it cost to maintain roads? And for every $1 you spend maintaining a good road, it costs $14 to get a bad road up to good condition. That is basic math. And when we're talking about taxpayer dollars, that's where it's so important to start from that, because we're actually costing the taxpayers more in the long run, the longer we keep our roads at that lower level of quality. So I think you start with the math, and we've had study after study that has told us we are short, and even though we passed, the legislature passed some additional revenue in 2015, it only slowed the decline. It did not improve the trajectory of having more roads in good condition.
Senator, and I'm going to say something too, because in 2015, that was everyone understood that was going to happen. So the perception that people were saying, oh, we fixed the roads, or we're patting ourselves on the back, it was never going to happen. And people knew it. And I think this idea that this this target is moving is a bit misleading. In 2010, the experts told us it was 1.2. Every year we delayed, the numbers were going up and up and up. So, I mean, in 2014, it was not 1.2. And we had to have the dollars then, not phased in over a number of years. It was a bad decision then, and we're going to have to go back and fix it. I think that's the reason why the number is so big. I don't like the number being so big. I'm disappointed that people in the past kicked the can down the road, but they did. So now we have to solve the problem. We took 30 years to solve the insurance debate. I think it's taken 30 years or so, 21 years to fix the wrong roads plan they passed in '97. I think it's going to take some work to do it, but it's not going to be a smooth path. I completely agree with you, and I think Mike's point is another good one. We do have to look at the resource side, but then we have to make sure that we have efficiencies and we do things the right way. And we have to look at this in a short and a long term, because the gas tax is a dying mode to fund our roads, because cars are becoming more efficient. We're going to see automation, but we have to fix the problem now. So I think it's something that we have to really get serious about, and I believe that we will, and I know the governor will as well. But I think this is something, the longer we delay, the bigger the problem gets.
Do we have the capacity to spend that much money on roads? Do we have that many road crews to spend an extra $2 billion on top of the $1.2 billion that we've already added?
If we give the industry long enough time to adjust for it, absolutely. This is a balance between the appetite of taxpayers and the capacity of the industry to deploy assets. And as long as we try to keep that in balance, we'll be fine. It may not be fast enough to suit some people, but that is an important balance to keep in mind.
So Senator Shirkey, the Senate has said it is working on a plan to answer the 45 cent per gallon gas tax proposal. We haven't heard a lot about that. Do you want to give us a little preview of what that's going to look like and when we will see it?
I think the last time I was on your radio show, Stephen, was in January, and you asked me when we would come up with a plan for insurance reform, and my answer to you was, when it's ready.
Is that your answer now,
That's
too?
my answer.
But can you commit to the idea that whatever plan the Senate puts on the table will address the problem in the same way, in the sort of same comprehensive way that the governor's proposal does? In other words, her proposal adds up to the full amount that most of the experts agree we need to fix the roads and keep them in good shape. Is the Senate committed to doing the same thing with its plan?
So I'm going to talk again. I'm going to beat this dead horse until it gets across to you, Stephen. But to me, this is a culture change.
Okay.
All right? I'm going to tell the story. In 1839, William Henry Stewart was just newly elected governor of New York State. 1839. In his inaugural address on January 1st of 1839, his top three priorities were more money for public education, more money for infrastructure, at that time it was canals and rails, but it's the same point, and a concern about skilled labor. So my point is that this is anybody who thinks we're going to come up with a road package and tie a ribbon around it and put it on the shelf and never have to revisit it again is not very smart. We're going to do this and create a culture that just continues well beyond the service of those of us that are sitting privileged to serve here right now. And yes, the $2.5 billion that the governor has laid out there as a goal, I think it's a legitimate goal. We may have a difference in how quickly, because again, it's the balance between the appetite of taxpayers and the ability of the industry to deploy. And we got to keep that in balance.
Jim,
I just wanted to add just
go
one more
ahead.
thing. You know, when we talk about dedicating the fuel tax to go directly to the roads and take off the sales tax, remember that sales tax, a good portion of it goes to the school aid fund. And so as part of that solution, we have to make sure that we don't fund one thing to the detriment of another. And we have to look at the entire picture. If we do make all the revenue dedicated at the gas pump, we have to make sure that we're making up that money for the school aid fund too, because education is a top priority.
But Christine, that does confuse voters because they see the pump prices here, they see the pump prices in Ohio, same. Sure. We take that sales tax and use it for other things. They're now going to see much higher pump prices here than they do in their neighboring states. How do you sell that to them when our roads are so much worse?
Yeah, I'm not saying it's bad not to have it dedicated to it. I'm just saying if you do take off the sales tax revenue, you have to make it up somewhere for the school aid fund.
Where does that come from, Jim? If you move the sales tax to roads?
I don't know. That's a good question. I've been operating off of the proposal the governor put in place, but I think Lee's point is it's a legitimate one. I mean, there's no question there is a sense of distrust in government in general, and I think that if we dedicate, if people know that the money's going to go, and I hate to use this term, I feel like I sound like Al Gore, but if you basically put the money in a lockbox, you at least with that, you could at least then restore the trust, right? So that people know that if they're paying for something related to a gas tax or some variation of that, it's going, whatever we do, it's all going to roads. Because I think that would help give people they don't believe that we're going to do, if we're going to raise the money, they don't believe it's going to go to the problem. If we can solve that aspect of it, it makes the amount of money we need to raise that much easier. So I think we have to build some trust by making sure that whatever we do, it's transparent and people know exactly where it's going to go, and then we can have a larger conversation about where it comes from.
So a related issue, of course, is the budget, which the roads are some portion of the sort of larger question about how we're going to spend money for the next fiscal year. We have gotten accustomed in this state to getting that business done almost before we get here to Mackinac, if not by the end of the week. That's not done now. I wonder if each of you could talk about dates by which you would start to maybe be uncomfortable with the idea that we didn't have a budget. Can you commit to staying throughout the summer, for instance, to make sure that we get a budget and don't get back into the situation where we're staring at the end of the fiscal year and don't have a plan? Speaker.
Yeah, I think the first step just needs to be that we have a responsible budget. I do know over the last 8 years, one of Governor Snyder's priorities was always to get it done by a certain artificially set date. I think it's irresponsible to box ourselves in because when you get close to that deadline, you start making quick decisions. So I think goal number one needs to be a responsible budget. The fact is this, if I had a carte blanche agreement by the governor that she'd sign a budget, we could have it to her probably next week, but we know that we're going to have to negotiate. We're going to have to work. And, we're in an era of divided government, and her budget proposal was 1 month behind, which is typical for a first-year governor. And, of 110 members, 45 are new in the House. I've been serving 5 months and have never voted on a budget, close to $60 billion. I will tell you this, I think it would be irresponsible for all of us if we held the budget hostage only because of roads. We have a lot of things that need to be funded, our schools, our local units of government. They need to know, they need to have certainty about what's coming down the pike. Now, we're going to have the roads debate. I will tell you this, if we link the roads and the budget and say we're not going to separate them, sure, it could be a long summer. But we have to be willing to have both conversations, but not necessarily have to tie them together.
So then if we get to, August, September, without a budget, and we're looking at, at the end of the fiscal year, how will you explain that to your constituents?
I think if the people of the state of Michigan wanted a budget in June, I think they'd have a constitutional amendment that said we want the budget in June. But right now, the Constitution says October 1st, and I think our main priority needs to be to have a responsible budget. Listen, I'm married with 5 children. I'd love to have a summer, okay? I'd love to enjoy myself. But the fact is I was elected to this position, and we're going to do as long as it takes to have a good budget.
Representative Greig?
Well, we need to keep working on it. Even though our fiscal year starts October 1st, the schools start July 1st. And I think it's also responsible to make sure that they have certainty on how they budget. And I really do see, looking at the roads issue, it's the governor's budget, right? It wasn't just roads. It impacted education as well. And that is integral to the budget itself. So I would like to see those conversations happening at the same time and also be aware of the impact we have on schools and municipalities when we don't get a budget done by midsummer.
Do any of you see this going to the deadline?
Not me.
I don't think it needs to, no.
So what will sort of shake loose that allows us to get past the current impasse? What's the sticking point that we get unstuck, I guess, to get to a deal?
Well, why are we assuming that there's a stuckiness?
Well, I guess,
Because we don't have a budget.
Because there's no budget, and because, the roads question looms pretty large in the background. I mean, I think the impression that I think most people have is that that's one of the big sticking points. Maybe there's some others too. But is it your impression that we're not stuck?
No, I don't think we're stuck at all. We just made great progress on something that's important to everybody in this panel, plus everybody in the state of Michigan.
Yeah.
And now we're going to, in earnest, continue on the budget. I believe it'll be shameful if we don't have, at least from a legislative standpoint, a proposed budget to the governor in near-term times like we have in the past 8 years. It'd be shameful for us to lose that discipline. And then the negotiation would continue. It doesn't require the entire legislature to be in Lansing to do that. And the only problem where we would run into stuckiness is if we decided that we're going to tie the two together, which I simply say we won't.
So far in the House, we've passed out subcommittee budgets out of appropriations. And some of the approaches going in is to do a blanket 25% cut to IT projects. So that's clearly not the answer, what we need to do. These are systems that administer unemployment systems, foster kids, all of that. We have a lot of work to do on those. But the major budgets, transportation and education, they haven't come out of the subcommittees yet. So in a way, we are stalled right now, and we need to get back to work and really hash out those details.
Yeah, we're limiting ourselves with short-sightedness, and that's a product of term limits. We're looking back to 8 years and saying we got it done in June, therefore we're stuck. The fact is this, it's no surprise to anyone in this room, car insurance has monopolized the conversation over the last 3 months, and now we're going to begin having open conversations on the budget. I'm optimistic. I am sitting here with what we just accomplished saying, we're going to get this done. We're going to work together. We have an open mind on it, but I don't view it as we're stuck. We are taking our time, and part of that simply has been we've invested a lot of time and effort into car insurance, but I think 7 million drivers will be happy next year that we did.
Should you work through the summer? Does anyone feel the need to work through the summer until this is done?
I think to Mike's point, and I don't want to speak for him, but I think I understand what he's saying, I tend to agree with him, is, there's this common, I think, misconception sometimes that 148 people need to be sitting in the chamber, just sitting there. I mean, there's obviously appropriation members, the leadership. I think there's nothing wrong with, a work groups meeting. I think those things should happen. I think those things will happen. I think we can get to a solution to both the issues of getting a responsible, on time, and investing budget, and also making sure that we have resources for roads. So I think, in my opinion, I mean, obviously I don't set the schedule, but I think that there'll be people working this summer. I just don't know if people need to be sitting in a chamber while there's nothing to vote on. But like I say, I don't set the schedule, but I'm hoping that that's at least.
We'll try to find you some time off, Jim.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Is there any appetite in the legislature to take up Prop A? I know our local communities have been, sort of pushing back against Prop A because of the slow recovery of the property tax revenue that was lost during the Great Recession. Will you be taking that up? Will you be revisiting, reopening Proposal A?
It is my intention that we evaluate the original intent of Proposal A and assess how well it achieved the intended goals and what the unintended consequences may have been. My definition of taking up means to do that assessment. It doesn't mean anything beyond that. But it's not going to happen until after a budget, after roads, because it's a shiny object that will get a lot of attention. But that is the one missing element that has been a frustration for me since the beginning in the legislature, is we don't take enough time to do retrospective oversight. And reviewing the decisions for spending we've made, reviewing the decisions on policy that we've made, and seeing if they're actually performing as expected or not. And it's a culture change, another culture change that I'm hoping that the four of us can change.
It's one of the reasons why when Mike set up the oversight committee, and there were some folks, sort of saying, oh, they're only doing this because it's a Democratic governor. And you didn't hear me clamor, you actually heard me be in support of it, because Mike and I have had a number of conversations over the last, number of years, but particularly over the last year, about how it's really extremely important. And I agree with Mike on this assessment that we pass things and we act like we're just done. Like as if looking back at something is somehow an admission of guilt. It's our responsibility to look at everything that we do. And I think Proposal A is one that is, it's 20-some years old now. It was one of the first votes I took. I actually voted no, but that's neither here nor there. But I think it's important to look back at all those kinds of things and say, is it performing at the level it should be? Are there flaws in it? Can we make adjustments? Do we need to overhaul it completely? And this is kind of what I see some of the functions of the Oversight Committee, obviously some of the committee process in general. So we can do there's big things we have to do within a time frame, and then there's other things that you can take more time, be more thoughtful with. And I think, we should do both. I think we can do both.
But we also have 148 members that are immensely talented in these chambers, right? We can be putting work groups together. We have so much experience with local government to take a look at revenue sharing. We have more educators than ever elected to look at the school funding model. There's nothing to say that this has to be a linear approach. We have immense talents in these two chambers on both sides of the aisle, and we can start looking at those issues at the same time we're doing the other big things.
So I agree. I feel like actually half the work we do in the legislature is fixing bills that we voted on the previous, right? I mean, you're constantly doing trailer bills, you're doing fixes to what you addressed last term. But I'm going to call a spade. I think this is a product of term limits. And let me speak for myself.
There we go.
Let me speak for myself. I mean, I am in my 5th year, and I'm still understanding the process, still learning the complexities of all these issues.
And yet you're the Speaker of the
You're in
House.
charge.
And by the time, I leave this 3rd and final term, I'll feel like, hey, I've got my feet on the ground, I'm ready to go, and I'm gone. So you only have so many large issues, truly, that you can tackle every single term. Every single person who's sitting up there that's a freshman legislator right now, it feels like they've been drinking water through a fire hose these last 5 months, and they just voted on the biggest piece of legislation that has been voted on in our chamber, arguably in the last 20 years. And that is a problem.
It's been the problem. Do any of you all think term limits have worked for Michigan? So what can we do about it? What can you all do about it?
I intend, I'll share this in this group and amongst my friends here, but I intend to address that issue in 3 years from now. And we're going to challenge the notion and challenge the appetite of the state of Michigan and the legislature to really evaluate whether it's something that we think is necessary or not.
With a ballot proposal?
Yes.
3 years from now, so 2022.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what will...
2021.
Yeah.
What's...
Right. Will
you try to scrap term limits, extend term limits?
So there's no middle ground here. This is just Mike's opinion, okay? This is Mike's opinion. But you either have term limits or you don't. We have natural term limits. They're called 2-year and 4-year election cycles, And so I'm not one of the ilk to say, let's change it from the current model to, pick a number. Anybody can serve 20 years, any combination. I think that's just another loosely term limit option. Listen, we've eliminated all the incentives to make it a career. There's no post-retirement, post-service retirement. There's no post-service health care. We get paid, but all of us could make a whole lot more money not doing what we're doing. So all the incentives to making it a career have been gone. That was the reason in which term limits were so attractive, because there were a lot of incentives for people to make it a career. And so I think it's time that we test that message, and we'll see if the citizens of Michigan buy it or not.
You 3 sign on?
Well, I have to look at the proposal, of course, but I don't.
I surprised him with this. I didn't.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that.
So,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. I'm taking my inspiration from voters, not politicians, right? So here is this citizen-led group that tackled this huge issue of gerrymandering. And they went across the state and they educated the public, and then they made this happen where we passed this independent commission. And I know after the election, they went around and held town halls, and part of the conversation is what's next. And tackling term limits was one of the topics that came up a lot. And I think if it's driven from the citizens, I think that's so powerful, and I would really like to work with that group as well.
So I'll add just one thing. It's alleged gerrymandering, however, but so
That's not what the court says.
So
Touché.
I would tell you this. Obviously, anything is going to have to be voted on by the people.
Right.
And we're kidding ourselves if we don't think that there's a political ramification to it. And many times things at the ballot are of a populist in nature. So we do have to take that into consideration, anything that we're going to put before the people, and they need to know that those that are currently serving don't benefit from it. I think that's going to be a key component of it.
So you would have to keep term limits in place for the current.
I think none
For
of
the
us have
people who
had this.
vote on the proposal.
We haven't had this internal conversation, but I'm telling you, you want to go out there and test to the people, hey, you think politicians should be able to serve longer? That's going down. That's going down harder than, the 45-cent gas tax, okay? People would not support that. But if it's done in a way where you do other important reforms in it, and I don't know what those reforms are right now, but you put other important reforms in it where they feel like, hey, they're actually making real progress. Maybe it's an ethics pack. I don't know what it is. But there's got to be something in there where they say, I can support that.
So you all mentioned, one of you mentioned the reapportionment and
Christine.
this the ruling from the Sixth Circuit Court panel that you all have to do a partial redistricting plan for the 2020 election affecting 14 districts, 14 Senate districts. How disruptive is that going to be if the Supreme Court doesn't make it stay permanent?
Extremely disruptive.
Can you
And
do it?
counterproductive, and frictional loss, and all the other negative connotations you can associate it with. But if that's what the courts rule, excuse me, that's what we'll have to do. You can put to bed, for at least for a time period, any other big reforms past the ones we've talked about, because that's going to take all, it's a shiny object, will take everybody's attention.
You expect to have to do it?
I do not expect to have to do it, no.
Jim?
I do not either.
We should talk a little about education. The governor's current budget proposal includes quite a few increases for education, more than we have seen in recent years. Up here on Mackinac, we had Jeb Bush here today to talk again about the things that they've done in Florida to move up the rankings of states when it comes to education. That's happened as we have moved down. Of course, talk about the proposals that are on the table in the current budget, and whether you support the idea that we need more money. We need more money in our schools.
I don't think there's many things we do that are as important as, training the next generation and ensuring that they're equipped to enter the next phase of their life. And I stood with all the Quadrant leaders earlier at a Launch Michigan announcement and with the study that they're doing, and just said we're eagerly awaiting the report. Obviously, education and roads are nonpartisan, but they are often politicized, let's be honest. And many times it's, at the heart of many different debates that we have. So I think we need to have a renewed focus on education. I think one of the ideas, since you asked for specifics, that the governor has proposed with, being a former teacher, I see a direct benefit in is having literacy coaches. I think, having the fundamental ability to read is at the core of all education. And having additional help in the classroom, listening to the teachers, having literacy coaches. I don't know what the right amount is for funding. I don't know. But having additional help in the classroom to teach these kids how to read, it's a foundation they can build on, later years in elementary and in high school. So much of what I think we're seeing with some of our low proficiency scores in high school is due to, the terrible success rating we have at third grade reading.
Yeah.
So let's focus on the reading, and I think that will be an excellent foundation we can build off of.
Well, there's a lot to be done, and I really look forward to the Launch Michigan report as well for their ideas. And what I really like about it is going out and looking to states like Massachusetts, like Florida, to see what they're doing and really taking the best practices and how they apply to Michigan. But we know classroom size is an issue for some grade levels, so we need to look at that. We need to look at teachers and how to better support them. I just attended a retirement party for Dr. Joyce Fouts, and she started the Galileo Project 22 years ago. And what that is empowering teachers and teaching them to be, it's teachers as leaders, and really putting the focus on professional development and empowering teachers to really manage their own classroom. So that's like the ultimate local control, is to give them the resources they need and then use their professional training and skills to really be the best in that classroom. And I would really like to see a lot of work on that as well.
Jeb Bush, when he spoke to us today, urged us to be bold in considering education reform. We haven't been bold in Michigan. One of the bold things he did, the first thing he did in Florida before he put in all these other reforms that we're trying to emulate, was consolidate authority for schools under the governor. He eliminated the independent elected school board. Is there any appetite for doing that in Michigan?
You brought that up this morning when we had a radio interview, and it's the first time it actually just crossed my mind, and I've been thinking about it since then. I think there's a real opportunity there for us to evaluate that. I don't have in my mind a final conclusion, but you've raised some questions that I think are worth exploring.
You know, when it's tied to the governor and who holds that office, then I think you have more of a tendency to have those pendulum swings, though, on your education policy. With the elected state school board that we have, not everyone turns over at the same time, and I believe they have, do they have 8-year terms on the school board, too?
I believe
so. You
so.
have more consistency in that, too, and that's what I worry about a lot with our education policy, that we are doing these major pendulum swings, and maybe that's bold, but I also think that when you're talking about kids at the center of the policy, you have to be very intentional and deliberate as well.
Jim?
Me? Yeah. Sorry. I fought it for as long as I could, but I spend a lot of time with Mike, and I now am starting to think like an engineer. Thank you. I'm not sure if I'm a very good one. I don't want me fixing your car, but so I think the question's an important one, but I think we've had some conversations without disclosing things that are happening at the quadrant level. I think I'd like to look at okay, let's assess what the problem is and work our way back from it, right? And I think I kind of, this is a weird analogy I'm gonna make, but it kind of reminds me of like what we've been doing with criminal justice reform. These were well-intentioned ideas in many cases. Some of them, I'm not even gonna put motive behind them, where we prescribe almost every second of the day for a teacher. It is dehumanizing. It is terrible for our educational system. And I'm not saying we should just wipe them all out. I mean, I think that's a pretty bold stroke as well. But I think we need to look and say, okay, do we really need to be this prescriptive? The teachers aren't robots, right? They're not at 2 o'clock on Tuesday. Everyone in the Michigan should not be teaching, the U.S. Constitution. There should be some flexibility. There should be some understanding that these are human beings and that they're interacting with children. I mean, Lee and I taught, and there's a number of other educators in the room and also that are serving with us. I think there's a way to address this in a real impactful way that frees up the ability for educators to be the best in their craft and to have the ability to actually educate kids and make sure that we're succeeding at the same time. And there's different ways to do that, and I think that's where the debate will happen, and we'll have some interesting ideas, and I think a lot of people in both chambers will have input on that. But if we do that, if we assess the problem first and work our way back, something like what you said should be on the table as well. But I think we need to make sure we assess what the real root of the problem is and then work our way backwards.
So I'll be brief because I know we're running out of time. I want to parlay off of that. I will tell you this, what we need are legislative leaders who are listening to the professionals in the field. I am firmly committed that the answers to education are not in Lansing. The answers to education are not in Washington, but I think they're in the classrooms right now, and we have to enable teachers to teach and give them the ability to do what they love. And I think our system has been an injustice to all educators across our state.
We've only got 2 minutes left, but you guys didn't really answer the question there. Money. There's money in the budget to put more resources behind some of the things in education that people say we need to do. Is that the answer? Talk about money versus other kinds of reform.
I think it can be a part of the answer, but it is not the sole answer. There need to be reforms, and we need to be committed to finding what those real reforms are.
Well, I did answer your question, right? If you reduce class sizes, that costs
money, right?
But we're starting to move toward this model, and some of it was in the governor's budget as well. Let's have the standard level. I think we're using the 1.5x formula or 2x formula, and then have these special areas of investment. So let's put the resources where they're the most needed. So if you have higher transportation needs, extra dollars for that, or high special education needs, extra dollars for that. We have to rethink how we are doing this funding. And there are so many needs. The finance, School Finance Research Collaborative laid it all out. Again, we've had studies that say we are underfunding, and if we really want to achieve and get up to a top 10 state and really take care of our kids, which is our economic future as a state as well, we have to get more investment in there, and that comes down to the budget.
Yeah. Senator?
Money can be part of the equation. I don't believe money is the crux of our issue in education. If we do decide to spend some more strategic, targeted money in education, I sure hope we have very finely refined and defined metrics to measure whether it actually worked or not. and not assume it's just a perpetual progress without, without checking on it. But money isn't the crux of our education issue in Michigan.
I think we need to make sure we put resources in many ways with the governor suggests in the budget. I think that's a good place. I also think, and I'm going to do this again, Mike, earlier I quoted Mike at the Launch Michigan thing, and I think this is a really important way to, if you think about education policy, Mike says quite often is, you always find what you're looking for. And think about education policy for the last 10, 20 years, and how many times have we used the word failure? In almost every discussion we talk about failure. We're failing to do this, we're failing to do that. It's no reason to wonder why we have a failing system. We don't have a success system. We need to have a success system and a success goal, and we will reach that goal. And one of the ways, a component of it, both in the short and long term, is money. But it's also making sure that we're using the money effectively and efficiently, and if it doesn't work, we stop doing it. Because we'll keep spending on things even if it doesn't work sometimes, and that's just a fool's errand.
Well, thank you all. We appreciate it. We're out of time. Thanks for the discussion.